Alrighty, we're going to get into talking about the first of the Mistborn books today. This is Mistborn: The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. Currently, I'm located in Lincoln, Nebraska, where Brandon Sanderson grew up, so that's pretty cool. Um, he's a pretty big name in this state, which is a place that doesn't have a lot of big names in it. Larry the Cable Guy. Um, so I decided recently during quarantine that I wanted to get back into reading, particularly going to my local library. And one of the first books I got was the first of the Mistborn books, along with some other recent-ish acclaimed fantasy, Patrick Rothfuss, N.K. Jemisin, and these are the first kind of adult fantasy books that I've been able to get into. Um, Recently, which is really exciting. I read a lot of fantasy when I was a kid, and it's very exciting to get back into fantasy that is aimed at people of my age group now, um, from authors who are writing with adults in mind, from authors who are writing with real stylistic choices that mean things to adults, and characters that are a little more round than some of the flat characters that you might get from young adult fantasy or young adult literature broadly. So the Mistborn books are about a world which has spent the last 1,000 years after some sort of disaster, ruled by essentially a god of a person who is immortal, and he has lived for the last 1,000 years, ruling over this city state and all of the surrounding places. But vegetation is gone and gross. Ash falls constantly from everywhere. Um, at night, there's these terrifying mists that all the people are afraid of. And we learn that there are some people who are not afraid of the mists, and these are people who can use a power called allomancy, which is a various grouping of powers that allow people to take control of various metals that they ingest and then use through a process that they call burning. Um, and we are introduced to a man named Kelsier, who is what is called a Mistborn, and that means that he not only can use allomantic powers, but also he can use all of the allomantic powers that exist. The power to do this is very rare and mostly only found in the nobility, who essentially subjugate another race called the Ska. From what I can tell, the Ska aren't really different from the nobility in any way, except they are essentially slaves living on plantations and doing hard labor. Um, and the Ska are not known to have the ability to learn allomancy or be born with the power of allomancy. Only the nobles can do that, um, unless they're born to a noble, Thomas Jefferson style, unfortunately. Um, which is rare because the law says that they're supposed to be killed if that happens. So, allomancy gives you different powers based on the metals that the allomancers ingest and burn. There are 8 basic metals, along with their associated powers that we're introduced to. There's one that allows you to push metal away from you. There's one that allows you to pull metal toward you. You can inflame somebody's emotions by making them focus on something like anger, for instance. That they call that rioting. Another power allows you to soothe, by kind of making people not focus on certain emotions. So maybe you would take away their anger or sadness and make them focus on hope or whatever. Um, there are people whose power is to make their senses stronger, so they could see better at night, they can hear better, further, etc. There is a power that allows you to strengthen your body, to make it tougher, stronger, faster. And then there are 2 more metals, which are one that hides the use of allomancy and one that allows you to sense others using allomancy. And the Mistborn are very exciting because they can use all 8 of these basic powers, but they're super rare. Allomancers are not very common in the first place, but Mistborn are very rare. Most of the people who can use allomancy are what they call mistings, which means they get one of the powers. And this is where the book really starts to get interesting, when they're teaching you about these powers through Kelsier, who can use all of them, and then you're immediately introduced to other characters who can only use one. And it seems like that could have potential to not be interesting, because you have a character here who can do it all, but the characters who can only do one thing, these mistings, are much more interesting. And Sanderson does a really good job of setting them up as specialists rather than the jack of all trades generalists that Mistborn often end up being, because these people have access to a single power, and that is very much more common among the people who can use allomancy. So the Mistborn are special. They're really powerful. They're good. They can do it all. Cool. But somebody who is really good at hiding the use of allomancy, and they call that a smoker. They create kind of an invisible cloud that protects people within it from being detected. Somebody who can do that and has only been able to do that for as long as they can use allomancy is probably much better at using that skill than somebody like Kelsier, who can use that and 7 other different abilities. Early on in the book, they set up kind of a heist. Kelsier gets a group of people together with a bunch of different abilities and teaches them about this plan that he's going to run. He's going to try to kill the Lord Ruler. He's going to try to raise an army of Ska Rebellion and try to get into the castle. And to do that, he recruits this gang of people who all have a specific role. He's got somebody who can use pewter to make his body really strong, and he's kind of their enforcer, and is planning to train the army. He has somebody, Breeze is a soother, so he can take certain emotions away from people and allow them to focus on different ones. And so he is their recruiter. He goes into bars, and like while Kelsier goes in and makes this speech, he is manipulating them from the back lines, not to make them do what he wants, but to kind of do what they want within the means that Breeze has provided them. So allomancy is a really cool fictional sort of magic system in this universe, because there is a lot of subtle things that you can do with it, and just being able to do one small thing that is different from an average human being can be very powerful when used under the right circumstances. So the majority of the book is Kelsier's struggle to kind of incite this rebellion amongst the Ska peasants in order to defeat the Lord Ruler, kind of free the people, and take these downtrodden, essentially slaves, and help them become the people that they know that they are, right? They're human beings, but the nobility don't really see them that way. And we're introduced early on to our main character, who's a young girl about 16 named Vin, who is kind of a thief in a crew out in the slums. And she discovers when Kelsier meets her that she is also a Mistborn. And she is a Ska Mistborn, which is incredibly rare because, again, the Ska don't normally get those powers. But she knows that her father was a nobleman. After she was abandoned, she learns this from her brother. And so that is where she got her powers. So Kelsier takes her under his wing, kind of a Gandalf or Dumbledore figure, and teaches her everything he knows, and discovers, like a lot of those very popular fiction series like Harry Potter, that she's really good. Not only is she a Mistborn, which is good and powerful and rare in itself, but she's really good at being a Mistborn. Over the 2 years that the novel takes place over, she does things that Kelsier couldn't do. She does things that people who've been training as Mistborn for 20 years can't do. And I think there's a real danger for that to be bad and off-putting when your main character is special because they're the hero, or too good at what they're doing in too short a time. And I think they do a really good job with Vin, letting her lessons with Kelsier, and then eventually one-on-one kind of lessons per se through action with the other members of the crew who are mistings and can only do one of the magic types. They do a really good job showing us what allomancy can do, its strengths and its limitations, and showing that Vin is good because she is a Mistborn. She's good because she's just naturally proficient, but also she works really hard. She's very untrusting at the beginning. She hasn't been around a lot of people who are very good to her because she was just kind of a street urchin. And she really learns to trust other people, she treats Kelsier kind of as a surrogate father throughout the book. And it's really nice to see her have a group of people who kind of care about her instead of just wanting to use her for being the member of a thieving crew. It's also challenging, I think, for Brandon Sanderson, who is a white man in his, middle age, to write a book about a young girl main character. and I think he does it pretty well. There's definitely some worry about men writing women tropes when you get a male author writing about a female main character, and I think Brandon Sanderson avoids pretty much all of that. Um, Vin is strong and brave and cool, but she's also scared and untrusting and nervous and hopeful. I mean, Vin has a lot of depth to her, and I think it's really refreshing to see a young girl be the main character of a kind of modern fantasy series aimed at anybody, right? Oftentimes, in fantasy, particularly, I think there's a stigma that boys won't read books about girls, books that are centered around women. And I think that it may be due to the nature of Brandon Sanderson writing this novel for adults, but that doesn't detract from the story in any way. I think that young boys in their teens would get action out of this book. I think that anybody would enjoy this book. This is the first of a trilogy, which is followed by another trilogy, all of which I believe have been well received, and Brandon Sanderson is still writing them, as far as I understand. Um, Overall, I thought that Mistborn was very good. The premise is very exciting. The idea that people can use metals to kind of gain special abilities, and then a lot of the movie is about arranging an army and kind of going on like clandestine like hunts through the night to try to do this kind of heist. Um, and the fact that all of the mistings have different roles just kind of naturally built into them due to the fact that they only have one power that they can use really creates kind of an Ocean's 11, like I'm the guy who's going to drive the car and I'm the one who's the explosives expert, kind of heist movie bent, which I really enjoyed about the book. Um, but yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about the Mistborn: The Final Empire. If the topic of Allomancy interests you, if a modern fantasy book with the main character who is a young girl, kind of finding her way in the world, toppling an evil power, intrigue, mystique. It's a lot more kind of small scale, like skirmishes, rather than like big Lord of the Rings style battles, which is also really cool. The majority of the book takes place inside this very large city, Luthadel. Um, I think Mistborn's really worth a read. If you like fantasy, I would say this book is probably appropriate for um, middle schoolers, middle school up. It depends on how advanced a reader you are in middle school. This is clearly aimed at adults. This is a book that I could have and would have read in middle school. But as far as content goes, there's a little concern. There's some allusions to some heavy topics like a little bit of gore. There's a couple allusions to rape, although there's no depiction of in the book, but something that parents might want to talk to children about going into this book or as they're reading it. I don't think we should shy away from those topics for children who are in middle school. I think that's an appropriate age to talk about them, but I do think that it is something that is to be considered when choosing this book for yourself or for your child. Overall, really exciting. I think Mistborn is excellent, and I'm very much looking forward to reading the next of the trilogy. And if this is interesting to you, I would highly recommend it. Thanks for watching.